Hello, 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 and welcome to yet another episode of the Conversation Capital. If you're watching from outside the country, the 21st of March in South Africa is Human Rights Day. And really just, hi, Bonga. I was about to ramble, then I realized I didn't greet. Hi, guys, how are you guys doing?
Hey, hi, we good.
I don't even think I said my name's Ashla Mariani. This is the Conversation Capital. Then we've got Given on the mic, Given Masilela. We've also got Bonga Bweta, the voice of reason. How are you guys doing?
I'm good.
I'm also good.
Awesome, thank you. So, Human Rights Day in SA, Bonga, what would you say? Commemorating the idea of human rights? Well, is that correct? Either way, it's Human Rights Day in SA. And so, one of the things, it's a bit of a difficult one because you don't want to be a Debbie Downer when it comes to South Africa. South Africa is a beautiful, amazing country. But one of the, struggles that we have is, femicide and gender-based violence. And we've got this thing, 16 Days of Activism, that happens in December, which really just brings awareness to gender-based violence in South Africa. And taking it a step further on Human Rights Day, we want to look at the idea and the concept of femicide and GBV through the lens of human rights. And to do that, we've invited somebody very important in the building, darlings. We've invited somebody from the Medical Research Council, Dr. Nwabisa Jama Shai. Hi.
Hi, Ashla.
How are
Hi,
you?
everyone. Hello.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come and share with us and just walk us through some of the research that's been done on the issues in SA. And like I said, hate it when people are Debbie Downers. South Africa, you don't want to be that. But these are, we're at least a nation that faces certain things head on.
Yes.
And we tackle certain things and we discuss certain things. Many solutions, or every solution starts with a conversation. And so we're sitting here saying, let's talk about the numbers. What does it look like? But perhaps let's introduce you first and say hi and welcome. And maybe if you could just share with us who you are and what you do at the Medical Research Council.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Nwabisa Jama Shai. I work as a researcher at the Gender and Health Research Unit of the South African Medical Research Council. I'm also a director there. And the work that we do at the Medical Research Council more broadly is doing research that is meant to advance the health and life of the South African population, because we are a parastatal. So we've been instituted or instated by an act of parliament. So we are accountable to government. The Department of Health is our custodian department within government that we report to, and also represents our organization. So we have a number of departments or research units. Some are looking at biomedical research. Others are looking at non-communicable diseases, and then there's also the maternal and health-related work, and we are part of that stream. So we're looking at more broadly how to advance the health and well-being of women, children, and marginalized communities or populations. And we do this by conducting research that is impactful, that is meant to make a difference in our communities. So we do lots of different types of research. We do look at mostly gender-based violence and what causes gender-based violence in our communities, particularly the violence that is affecting women, children, and marginalized populations. We also come up with solutions. So we design evidence-based programs that we test with communities, and we've moved towards working with communities and community members to develop these interventions. And we've also started doing the research with the community members as well. And we come up with these evidence-based solutions that we bring back to communities, but through channels like the community-based organizations or NGOs. And we work in a multi-sectoral kind of a collaborative setting where we meet with other government departments, NGOs, other researchers, development partners, those that provide the funding as well, to come up with ways that we can make these interventions, scalable in our communities. By scalable, I mean that the communities are able to then take them on and implement them. So there is a think tank that I'm also part of, called the Violence Prevention Forum, and that's this multi-sectoral group that I work with, who we've recently in November we had a 2-day meeting where we're talking about what's the most current research we have, and what are the implications for the policies that South African government and others involved in policy development could take up, as well as what community-based organizations can do to translate and make these interventions or solutions implementable on the ground.
I really like some of the questions. You're already segueing into some of the questions. Like you start off by saying you do research into what causes gender-based violence, which is really interesting. That's a really interesting question to ask, because my immediate thing is, what causes gender-based violence? Kihosa.
It's true.
So, but give us a more informed perspective. Because I know that the perspective that I have is definitely the perspective of many South Africans who are just like, the causes men, or I shouldn't even say men or women, are aggressive and violent and silly and ill-trained. And but, maybe just looking at some of the things that you've seen, if you're to give us some more pragmatic I don't know if pragmatic is the word to use, but it's a funny word for the show.
Yes.
More of a pragmatic and academic perspective. What causes gender-based violence in South Africa? What do the numbers show?
I'm going to ask
Or
you,
the research.
I'm going to ask you, what is this? Interrupt that.
Yeah.
And say, let's start with what is it? Like,
Yeah.
I think we use the term so much that there may be someone who's watching, like, but like, what is it? Violence is violence. Why is this one gender-based violence? So I feel let's start with what is gender-based violence, or we can go into femicide as well. Yeah.
All right. So what we call mainly in South Africa gender-based violence is really violence that is taking place against individuals because they are basically not men, and gender becomes part of it because of the inequalities that are related to being a woman and also your offspring while they're still young. And what is happening is that we're talking about the violence that people experience because of the inequalities and, let's say, the subjugation or oppression that is related to their gender. And the people whose gender is oppressed mostly, it's women, as well as their children, especially their girl children, because they're not seen. They're rather, made more vulnerable because they will grow up to be women. It's a very simplistic answer, but there are other things around the inequalities which women and girls are exposed to, which means because you're a woman or a girl, the expectations that society has about who you are that you are sort of secondary or subservient individuals whose whole existence is created around the pleasure of men, the privileging of men. And so women and girls become vulnerable to violence in particular, because they are already positioned in a space that says that you do not necessarily matter. You are not, your life doesn't matter if we're thinking about it from a human rights perspective, as long as you are meeting the needs and the demands of men in your life. So we value, we also in a society, as a South African society, values more the voices of men, gives a credence to what men say. It doesn't matter whether this men, if you're thinking about rural communities, we would say something like, you may have an uncle who is always drunk, who is not necessarily a constructive contributor to the family and what we do, but their value, or rather their voice is valued much more than young women in this family who may be working, bring in the income, helping to build this household, etc., etc. So, and that is because of the socio-cultural values that we associate with men versus women. So that's part of why women and girls are vulnerable. And just to provide then the example, so the ways in which women and girls in particular are violated, it is when, for example, we have emotional abuse, whether it comes in the form of verbal insults, and some of it can be what we call psychological abuse, which leads to mental incapacitation or poor mental health, like depression or post-traumatic stress disorder. It can come from being a consistently insulted, degraded, demeaned, and then there's also the physical forms of violence, from beating to strangling to being dragged down on the floor by your hair, to being punched with fists, and also there's sexual violence, which I think the most clear example is rape, when a woman or a girl is forced to have sex with a man without their consent, when they do not want to, and maybe even tricked or manipulated into it. So the broader term sexual violence also takes into account the kind of forced sex that may come with trickery, manipulation. There's also economic and financial abuse, and this one we really don't pay as much attention in South Africa. But what I could make an example of is when we're talking about lack of maintenance of children by fathers. We have examples of women whose finances are constrained to the extent that they must be looking after their children when the fathers are deciding when they can have the means or can make the means to come up with ways for their children to be, to have food, to live in a kind of at least, good shelter, go to good schools, etc., have clothes on their backs. And so there's these kind of clear four clear examples of what gender-based violence or violence against women looks like. But then there are variations of how these forms of violence manifest, to the extent that it can start with, insinuated or degrading comments, which can build up, and they can build up on their own into more consistent, persistent emotional verbal abuse. But the impacts of that abuse could lead to poor mental health. Then you can then add to even like let's say small scale emotional abuse. You can add physical abuse, a slap here and there, a kick here and there, sexual violence, etc. But what we've also been paying attention on while we're looking at this variation of gender-based forms of violence against women and girls in the MRC is that we've been looking at the killing of women, which is now the most extreme form of violence. And the killing of women it doesn't happen just on its own. It comes from these forms of violence that keep occurring, whether it is a person, they would have said they snapped when they then eventually killed the woman, but it would have come, the seed is from the violence that is taking place that we're not doing anything or enough to stop. And that's where the problem of femicide comes in. And we see various forms of murder of women. We see women being killed by their intimate partners, by their family members, and we see women being killed by people that they're not necessarily in a familiar relationship or intimate relationship. So, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's just strangers, but strangers could be the people that the women know, a guy perhaps also that knows the woman in the area, or a girl in the area, and may have whatever gripe they have, and it could be from something as simple as she doesn't want me, she doesn't like me, or I'm sick and tired of her thinking she's better, I'm gonna come into her house and I'm gonna do whatever. So we have also an overlap of sexual violence taking place with the killing of women.
You're highlighting something that I find is a crucial part of the conversation that we need to have. And I look at the story around Swiss Lawrence. So Swiss Lawrence was this individual who had, altercations with his girlfriend. Often they broke up, came back together, blah, 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 blah. The story goes on. And I, we can make an example because this was all over the media. Everybody knows the story. And he went on, before he went on to kill her, or after he killed her, he went on to record a video describing, and I remember watching that video and seeing somebody who felt justified to kill this person.
Whatever, I don't know what he said. I don't remember.
Yes, he just, he went on to kill himself afterwards because he knew that there were repercussions to come. And what was crazy for me is watching the social media comments and the men that stood with him, even some women that stood with him, that there was a justification, that he had been through enough and he snapped.
We can talk about that.
Because this, for me, this is the conversation that needs to be had around, what causes GBV. And for me, there's like a critical, there are more people that think like that than we care to admit.
Absolutely.
Do you get what I'm saying? There are more people that think you get to a place where it's okay to do this. For me, it was just that, seeing how, even to record it, he felt, I'm entitled to do this. I'm allowed to do this. So I deserve this. Yeah.
That comes from a sense of ownership that goes with this, these unequal relations, can be unequal positioning of women versus men in their relationships. So it comes from a sense of ownership. So you are my partner and I treat you, or you are actually my wife, and I do things for you, I spend money on you, I give you my heart, my love, etc. It is so valuable to the extent that I end up owning you. I don't just feel I own you, I own you. So it is in where you walk because I tell you to, it is where you go, it is how you dress, it is who you speak to when I say it. It is about the man feeling that because he's associated with this woman, that everything about her belongs to him. And I know with this Swiss Lawrence issue is that he then talks about how this woman may have broken his heart because she had, a child that wasn't his, etc. But the thing is, he could have let go from the moment he found out she cheated on him, or the moment he realized that actually she wasn't into him as much as he would have loved, her to be. But that comes from this notion that people have that I'm in this relationship for life, regardless of how I get hurt or how much I could hurt the next person, and we then get into this rut.
You're touching something very important here. That for life can get people.
You're ride or die. Yeah. So that mentality, but it's I think something that people just get into kind of an ongoing battle of wits, perhaps. But anyway, I think they are isolated. That's an isolated and very extreme example. There could be a woman who is sitting unknowing, of her partner's behavior. And when he realizes that he's messed up so much outside there, and she may not be aware, he comes back, he kills his family and the children. So the woman is killed and we have a femicide. And that's her intimate partner. Do you see? So it's still about, I own this person. Or it could be that in order for me as a man, because there's something that I think we're not talking about men is that the way society has constructed who a man becomes and who a woman becomes, it is not necessarily healthy for men to have all of this power, because it also hurts them, gets them to behave in ways that are unhealthy, like the Sibusiso Lawrence example. It gets men to also feel the pressure, with the example I'm making now of a man who may have made bad decisions or found himself in a bad situation and thinks that there's no other option but to come back and kill and wipe out his entire family. And it comes from the social pressure that we put upon men as society to perform this unrealistic Superman kind of existence in a country and in an environment where actually, it's really not achievable. And it doesn't necessarily mean when you have all this power that you're actually mentally well or that you're actually happy, etc., etc. But we put so much pressure on men to provide, on men to have, this huge, big men kind of Don mafia type of existence. And whether then Usisbiti like has so many girlfriends and like is likable by everybody, he has the money, etc. All of that doesn't really bode well for men either. And so it's not just that women are, so when we're doing our research, we don't only look at women being violated. We also look at some of these factors that shape the violence that we see. And we've done a lot of work to understand men and what we call, I think now it's been translated into what is called toxic masculinity, but we have looked at what we term harmful notions of masculinity. And it's also these things that I must have as many partners as I can, I must drink as much as I can, and it's like a competition with other men for success, for me to be seen to be the top dog, etc. And then those guys, also society makes it seem like men who are playing within this kind of masculinity are attractive. They're much more attractive to women. Oh wow, like he's got a car and he seems to, girls like him. He may be handsome or not. That doesn't matter. And then we have those phrases, our African phrase about about men is the number of cows he can come up with, not necessarily his looks or good looks. I think that's my loose translation.
Yes, there we go.
So it's all of these things, and then young women on the side, they also want to go out with a guy who is likable, who
You're saying that the culture of indoda must is where the problem is. Because women have this thing, indoda must pay the bills, indoda must, So that culture in itself is where the problem starts.
I think it's in the way we have handled all of these sayings, all of these social pressures. Because anyone in a relationship must bring whatever that's going to make the relationship come alive. Like, my partner, we bring together what we can. And and I know we're talking about, it's not necessarily equality, it's the equity of it. So whatever means I can sum up to bring into this relationship and what they can bring. And then we make life happen. We're able to get this chair, we're able to get this mic, we're able to go to do something to make a living, bring up the children together. But anyway, culture is the thing that we have, constructed, we've built it ourselves so that it makes sense only to privilege a few.
I'm always very conflicted with the statistics that are given with regards to South Africans and GBV. And I want to know, there's this argument that we're just reporting better than other countries. We're just reporting more, Or is it really more dire than other countries? As somebody who's in the Medical Research Council, who's researching these things on a daily basis, would you say that we have a habit of being transparent with the world? Or would you say that, no, we've got an issue? Is that a tough question?
No, it's not. I'm just finding it interesting that you've picked up on that. South Africa has a big problem of gender-based violence. Big problem of violence against women. Big problem of violence among men with each other. Violence against children.
Sure.
So in Gauteng, we're in Gauteng. In 2010, we conducted a study, and the results from the study, it was a population-based survey. So it was a sample of households, and its representative and Stats SA was involved in leveling up and making sure that we have sampled adequately to be able to come up with what we call a representative, or generalizable, at least a representative sample that allows us to generalize for the whole population of Gauteng. And that study told us that 50% of women in that study reported that they had experienced any of the forms of violence that I explained earlier. And this study worked with men too, so we interviewed men as well. And the same study showed about 75% of men had done some of these forms of violence that I mentioned earlier. So that's just Gauteng. And then we have had a now population-wide survey conducted by a Human Sciences Research Council. And their study found in 2022 that 1 in 3 women in South Africa have experienced any of these forms of violence that we're talking about in their lifetime.
Just to give context, we are 3 women in this room. One of us
has ever experienced it in our lifetime. Now, when we're talking about whether we have a problem of violence in South Africa, we compare that 1 in 3 women in South Africa having experienced any form of violence. We then compare that statistic with the World Health Organization statistic that is looking at multiple countries reporting and having conducted using the same measures that South Africa used, same measures to report on the way in which women are abused. And the same measure, the same finding, 1 in 3 women in the world have reported that they have experienced violence. So do you see? South Africa has a problem of violence that is proportional in a way to the rest of the world. It's not about we report more, we're reporting at the same rate, but there's a difference in that other countries don't report as much. So that's a collated figure. The 1 in 3 global statistic. South Africa is 1 in 3 here in our country.
In the country.
Yeah.
Sure.
And there are variations of those statistics in the sense that that's just a global figure for South Africa, but there's more emotional abuse being, a reported physical abuse. I think that's the 1 in 3 figure. But when we're looking at the femicide figures, so we've talked about, like kind of nationally, provincially what could be happening. Then we've spoken about comparing nationally, and then we're comparing with global. But with femicide, 1 in 3 women are killed by their partners. Every day. And when we're looking at 1 in 3 women are killed by partners every day, but then we're looking at the global figure of femicide, which is that the rate of femicide that we have in South Africa, whether it's women killed by partners or not, it is 5 times the rate of women being killed globally.
Sure.
So more South African women are killed than the rest of the world. So there's a gap there. So whether we are able to do our research and it reflects really what's happening with gender-based violence. But what we see with femicide research, and that one is undisputed because these are women who are killed. They are at the morgue. The Department of Health, through their forensic system, have collected the data that says this is a body, it is female, probably between the age of this or that. So our femicide research looks at women from the age of 14, because we know that girls can also be raped and killed. So we know that we acknowledge violence against women and girls. And from 14 years, we see that 14 years and older, we then collect data from the mortuaries.
I like that you're highlighting the accuracy of femicide, because unlike with,
what we say,
yes, what we say,
what
no,
we
I
say
haven't
to
been
researchers.
beaten.
Yes.
Or, yes, I have been
Yes.
beaten, but now kisto puraibona.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So these are then bodies that are verifiable to have been murdered. These are then for us to know who may have done this, then we go, because then there's a connection between the death and then the police needing to be notified, and there's an autopsy that gets done to look at things like the manner of death, and so on. But then the police give us another affirmation to be able to distinguish this was a partner that did this or not, because they also have to investigate every death. Excuse me. And when they've done that, then we've been able, that's why I'm holding on to this paper, because this is a policy brief of summarizing the research that we had done on femicide. And this is looking at the year of COVID. So just to draw an example of what happened during the year of COVID, when everyone was, locked down, and of course there were variations to the lockdown, but we see that the rate at which women were killed isn't very different when they were killed during the year of COVID, that first year of COVID, compared to the last time we did the same research in 2017. But what we saw instead is that more women were killed by their partners, and there was a significant difference between women being killed by their partners in 2017 compared to women being killed by their partners during that first COVID year.
Okay. So you're saying that generally women were still being killed the same?
Generally,
but specifically
even
by your...
more. Even more. So when we're saying statistically significant, we mean in a definitely notably different way. So the stats that we're seeing, there's a difference with the comparing with the previous stats. So there is a notable difference here. And when it's been calculated with a comparison of the previous stats, there is a gap that we should be noting there. So when we would have thought women, people were at home, when we're looking at the home probably being the safest place, for people to have been, when we're thinking we should have been more concerned about not contracting COVID or dying from it, or family members dying from it, we had women being killed by their partners.
This brings me to, for me it's black and white. For me it's black and white. It can never be justified. But what I'm hearing is that people are stuck in houses with their partners, and it's obviously stirring up issues that were always there. But now we're in close proximity. We don't have 8 hours separated by work. We are here all the time. And the frustrations build and build and build. And there's more, occurrences of violence that are occurring. Right? This is the conclusions one can draw from why it was higher during COVID. And this brings me to, and it's unfortunate that I have to ask because I feel like it's obviously no, but I feel like to do justice and have a fair conversation, the question must be asked, if some women, is there a culture of women enticing men to kill them? Do you understand what I'm asking you? Are some men justified to say, no, but I was stuck with this woman and she was pestering me and she was, really a pain. And it led me to feel like what Sir Lawrence was saying, that I was entitled to. She cheated on me. She made me raise for however long a child that was not mine, and I blew my top and I killed her. Is there a connection that you can say there is an argument to be had there, Ursula? Or are you like me, who's on the side to say there is no argument to be had here?
Who has a right to take life? This is a human rights segment, right? Okay. So to take anyone's life, it is certainly wrong. It's a violation of that individual's life, but also it impacts the other people in this person's life. So there is no excuse. There's no excusing it. There's no tolerating it. There is no justifying it. Anyone who takes anyone's life, that's a no. It's just there's no way it can seem like it's better or not. And the reason that we are much more concerned about women being killed is all of these things that we have said. Women are oppressed in society. They're oppressed in their relationships. Partners feel they have ownership over their women. Male partners feel they have ownership over their female partners, and that these women must do their bidding, whether they like it or not. So when then we have women who are living in this context where their mere existence is at the whim of their men, it definitely says that we'll see women being killed that way, because when his whim says that she no longer deserves to live, or she doesn't deserve to breathe until I say she stops, or if it happens because that's what I want, then or she should not be breathing because I've had enough of my life too, or the worst punishment she could get, and actually the one that she should be getting for cheating on me, even if I've cheated on her and she,
But it's not the same.
Because she has no right to do that, right? And she should take, whatever I provide or I give, whether she's had enough, whether rather it's enough for her or not, she should just take it. So that's why I'm saying that there is no excusing women being killed. We're much more concerned about women being killed because we know that there are other forces that determine who women should be and whether women are valuable members of society or not, because a particular man believes that they are. And this is also something, there's also another element that I think I should introduce, in that the way we have made women so vulnerable, it's not only about their partners that degrade women. We have people who feel they're entitled to have sex with any woman that they want. So we have rape taking place. I made an example earlier of a guy who will feel that they want to sleep with that woman and this woman has been resisting. And they decide, okay, I'm going to break into their house. I'm going to do what I want with them. And then I'm going to slaughter them just to prove a point because I can. So and also there are other things going on with that, because there's kind of like the mental state of the individual. But the thing is, it is so pervasive as an idea. The sexual entitlement of men also, when you mix it then with other elements, it also then puts women at much more risk. So we at a much higher risk. So we are concerned that women are are vulnerable, and they're made more vulnerable because of the society that we live in. And there is no way that they can be, we can excuse murder of women. So when we're thinking about human rights and just that bit, human rights is really about when we think about violations of human rights, it's about violating the person's right to life, their right to safety and security, their right to not be demeaned or degraded.
Yes, I like this one. Yeah.
And so right to life is a little bit more physical. Degrading behavior is about their emotional well-being. And then safety and security is about their environment and where they are. So if we're thinking about the violence women experience, we centered it in that context where they are feeling unsafe because the way they walk, they could be attacked anytime. In their relationship, they can't feel I am comfortable, I can trust this person is going to treat me well, like, I deserve to be treated well. Their emotional state also is at risk, and all of that. So when we're thinking about human rights, is when we see that the violence that we have in our country really tramples on these different rights to simply just breathe.
And, as you're speaking around demeaning and men feeling entitled, I always think of quick examples in my head, but I'm to think about just the culture around catcalling in South Africa, and how it always just reminds me, because there's no end to catcalling, in the sense that this construction worker or taxi driver and whatever isn't catcalling you genuinely pursuing you. It's just to remind you that I can say whatever I want to you. I'm always reminded of that when somebody who just a man just wants to remind you that umusadi, whether you are driving, whether you are educated, whether you're, at the end of the day, I can say whatever I want to you, and you will be scared, because it's not easy to go ngaiwena. You can't. You need to consider the repercussions. Yes.
What's the repercussion?
So you need to almost take it submissively to say, hey, I don't know what this man can do to me. So for me, the catcalling culture is only such a reminder of that entitlement that, men can have over women. I want to enter, as we're now tapering down the conversation, I just want to look at, the justice system. And what are some of the things that you think can still be implemented with regards to gender-based violence and securing human rights in our country?
Okay.
Because, you spoke of these implementable solutions that you look at the MRC. And so maybe if you can walk us through some of those things.
Okay. So just talking about the criminal justice system, just want to highlight a few things around our report from the femicide study that we completed, that I mentioned was done during the year of COVID. So what we found was that gunshots were the most common manner of killing of women. And when we're looking at this, for all femicides, it was about 37% of the femicides, with about 2,400 femicides. And so 37% of those were, for all the murders of women, were with gunshots. And there's a law around firearms, ownership access. We hear of access being a little bit more lax, and the police sometimes, reflecting a problem of unlicensed firearms that they find in different scenarios. They relate to crime. But then there are those people who own guns, who use guns against their female partners to kill them. And there's something there, because you can go and apply, but there are certain things that should be done, including looking at the person's history of violence. And those connections need to be made to check the history of this person as they seek to have this firearm. But there's a gun lobbying NGO that does a lot of work around guns. Our colleagues are going to write up some research papers. Maybe they'll finish by the end of February next year. It's called a Lancet Commission on Guns and Guns and Health. And they will be looking deeper at the issue of guns and violence in South Africa as well. So there's the way in which the enforcement of the law around firearms is being is being enacted by police, etc. And then there's another issue that with femicides, we also have a problem of the perpetrators not being identified. And that is because like in 56% of these femicides, we know who the perpetrator is. But there's the rest who we don't know who the perpetrator is. And that definitely shows us that there is not enough resources allocated to the investigation of female murders. And that needs to change. There is also something else we could do before the violence actually takes place, rather the femicide takes place, is that we could also intensify the way we investigate and treat domestic violence cases through the Domestic Violence Act. There are simple things like there is a tool that the Department of Justice has developed that is looking at women, helping women to assess their risk of experiencing intimate partner violence, and to look at the severity. Is the violence you're exposed to severe? And so that they can then take that individual case and then refer them to services that would help them maybe to hopefully remove themselves from that relationship and remain safe. So what we're doing now, we're doing research to see and assess whether this tool is working well in helping women to identify the risk that they're experiencing. And so we're doing research to strengthen the way in which we preempt the risk women could have for severe violence. But for us, we are actually looking at prevention of femicide. So to determine whether women are experiencing severe violence now, so that we can then enter them into hopefully services that will prevent them from being killed. And so our criminal justice system is doing something right in terms of being now empowering women to be able to be alert to the risks that they could be exposed to. And so that's something that is good. So it's done through the police, and the services are supposed to have this tool to help facilitate the self-assessment that women should have. But then there's also the way in which the Domestic Violence Act is being implemented when it comes to the women can report to the police when they're experiencing violence. But then there's also the thing of the protection order and how the protection order is, the law says you can seek a protection order, but whether seeking the protection order is done properly in terms of not exposing women to the perpetrator that they are running away from. Because if I have to go into a court system and say, give me a protection order because this person, I'm afraid for my life. I'm afraid he's going to beat me again, or he's going to hurt the kids. Or my tires were punctured yesterday and it happened 2 weeks ago. The same thing. And it happens when he's around because he works outside town. Then, I'm just, can you protect me from this guy? Can he not know or come near where I live? Yes, we are married. These are our kids. Or we've been living together. We have children together. But can you put this protection order so that you can protect me from this? So I think the criminal justice system fails in taking seriously any form of threat to women, threat of harm to women. The broader definition of gender-based violence, I think the WHO's a definition actually doesn't only refer to actual incidents of violence taking place, of the different forms I've mentioned, even the threat of harm in the various forms that we've mentioned. A threat that, when I'll kill you. I'm not afraid when to bandintela. I can go to prison for you. I'm not afraid of that. Those kinds of things, should be trigger warnings for women that my life is in jeopardy here, that I could be hurt here, right? But then the criminal justice system, when a woman says it, they should believe it, and they should take it seriously. And so now we have cases where a protection order is meant to be immediate in that you get the interim order when there is a threat to life or a threat that this thing could escalate. And like when the magistrate hears it, that this thing could escalate. But it shouldn't be debatable when we're talking about threats, because we don't know when then he will act. What we want is the protection order to prevent him from coming close enough to even try. But we see lengthy cases of protection orders that are just prolonged unnecessarily. Cases of people that I know, people who are in my life, I've seen them go on for about 8 months. And we're looking for an interim order. You're not looking for a permanent order against this person. You are in a relationship, there's a debate about whether the woman should be moving out when she has children and this guy is the one that is violent. Now, she should move out or they should be sharing the same household. But this guy, I came to you for a protection order so that you stop him from trying to kill me. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's the way the magistrates sometimes either listen or don't listen to what it means to experience violence for women. And it's in that we find it's quite challenging, because it's in what seems like the small things that we have. Another challenge with the femicide data is that we don't know enough now. We used to measure this very well in terms of the police used to record the history of violence in women's femicide cases before. They're not doing it so well now. And this ability to know whether there was a protection order or a report against this man before this woman was killed, we no longer have that kind of data collected by the police.
I like the practical, the practical example that you're giving with regards to, just knowing people. I'm somebody who, I will defend South Africa with my whole soul. I love my country. I'm a patriotic person. But I can agree with the part where, sometimes we are let down by the systems in place. And for me, that's where it goes back to the mindset thing. And I remember when the penny dropped for me, I was sitting with an older woman, a granny, who had said, she had explained her story of GBV, and she had, but it was an old person being beat by her fellow old husband. And so the two of them, then, so she's being beat by the husband. She lobbies the community gets the husband arrested. And once the community gets this man arrested, I think a week later, the police department calls and says, "It's cold in these cells. This man is old. Come drop the charges." And I was sitting there when she got the call. I heard the police officer say this to her. And I remember it broke my heart, because it was no longer hearsay. It was no longer a distant thing for me that, there's no support. It was something that I was seeing practically happen to this old lady. She picked up this, little popotani phone, and here it's, us from whatever police station. Come drop the charges, man. The cells are cold. And I was broken for her. And I remember her getting so upset. "Why are you guys doing this? He's going to finish me off. You want him to kill me."
He probably has been doing it for years. Yes. Why would he, in his old age, now start doing it?
Yes.
Can I just express this now? I say this to our credit as a country personally, and I'm saying also as my own opinion. I do think South Africa is quite diligent in reporting than a lot of countries. And I think it is something that, and like I said, I'm saying it as an opinion because, for example, there's a video I once watched which really convinced me of this. A girl who was, she's from South Korea, and she was expressing just how much, forget catcalling, a woman being kidnapped in the middle of Seoul, I think is their main city. Mm-hmm. Just literally boys coming in a car, opening the car and kidnapping you in the middle of the street is a normal thing. Mm-hmm. The culture there is to such an extent that you're not going to see videos on social media about it. You're not going to see reporting. The government doesn't consider it a statistic. It's not part of mentioning. It's not a category. It's much like also what we see with the new AI that came out of China, DeepSeek. There are so many instances that you could try to AIs have a mind of their own. There are certain things that even the companies that make them can't stop them from saying those things because they're so unpredictable. China is so aggressive at protecting things that happen inside the country that you can't even Google things that everyone knows happened. You can't Google strikes. You can't Google mistakes that are made by the government. Literally, the world knows about it. There's one specific one that a lot of people were trying to get the AI to say, because sometimes with AI, if you phrase things differently, they eventually start talking about or saying what you're looking for them to say, and the AI wouldn't say a word. So if they can get their AI not to breed a word about, because protests in China, like they shut them down like before they even happen, right? So there is a part of me that really does believe that. I think South Africa, and I really do say it to our credit, because at the same time we measure the problem, which means we know the scale at which we have to solve the problem, right? There's definitely that part of me that's convinced. And then a question I wanted to ask is, I'm curious as to, and I think Ursula did ask it in the beginning, both opinion and also based on research that you've done. What do you think is the biggest contributor to this problem that we have? By that I mean, is it cultural? Is it religious? Is it a matter of not having, because from what I'm looking at, I did a brief search. From what I'm looking at, it seems like the countries that have the highest numbers of GBV, I specifically looked at GBV, are Africa and the Middle East. Which the Middle East, you can easily say a lot of the countries, they are very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Patriarchal. A lot of them are. I mean, like, why is there only 30% women in, let me not say the country, because someone likes to holiday there.
hey, leave me out.
Let us leave it. But I think I've got you, but I do want to, so we'll come to this other one. I just want to, I'll paint a picture to respond to your second question. But I just want to go a little bit into your comment about us as a country doing well. I think we are doing well in terms of recording what is important, and that comes from, of course, our legacy of the atrocities that South Africa faced under the apartheid regime and the many lives lost and the many human rights violations taking place. And you had started us on why we are commemorating Human Rights Day. It is because of the Sharpeville massacre. People standing up against an oppressive system, and they were gunned down. And it wasn't the one day that this had happened. It had been happening before that. We commemorate Youth Day because of a similar method. But the Sharpeville massacre is the reason why 21 March 1960. Yes, and that kind of tallies with when Mandela's, nearing his arrest from the underground movement. But I think that shook many of our political organizations that were fighting the apartheid system at the time. So the violations were so systemic, but also systematic, in that when we got our 1994, a vote that included those who were disenfranchised in the country, the commitment around the Constitution was to also make sure we put systems to prevent any of these violations and to create an existence for South Africans that would ensure that they're able to enjoy their rights to the full. So it's the right to life, the right to healthcare, and the right to security, etc., education, and so on. And just to kind of course correct in a little bit with the violations to women's, women and gender through gender-based violence. It is such a systemic and a systematic thing, in the same way you could look at it when you're looking at apartheid, because there was a social ideology that said that these people are not worth only if they are. They're good enough for labor. They're good enough if they are, subjugated to a white man. It's the same with the women subjugated to a man. There were cultural things that were made, that were created, ideologies that were made practical, like black people could not be seen in town past a particular time because they need to be back where they belong, which was in the township. They could not own houses in a particular place. They couldn't do certain types of jobs. And this is the same gender inequality that we're seeing has been happening to women. Now, 3 women, 1 guy in this room.
At it that way.
So 3 women, 1 guy now. Guys, we're speaking English, ne? And we think we know this language, and we think we're professionals in our lives. We think we're doing well in our careers. You guys, you ladies, people, beautiful people, you have a podcast. People are listening to you, but that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a recognition that there needs to be equality across gender. And this happened because of these recognitions, the recognition of what needed to change in order for South Africa to be built anew. So our stats systems are working well because we needed to have a renewal that was about freeing people, freeing the soul, but also enabling systems to correct what had been done wrong. And that's why we have the systems. It doesn't mean that the systems are working. So we can have researchers who work a little bit more independently than government-employed individuals. So there are certain things that researchers in parastatals, because of the little bit of removal that we have from a government or maybe even party politic kind of influenced institutions, we at least have the freedom to be able to decide on a research topic that we think really best represents society, helps to change and improve the lives, quality of life and advanced life and health, at least in the case of our institution, etc. So we're able to do these things because we have the freedom to do so. But that freedom was actually won through the reaction and the responses that are linked to the reason we have Human Rights Day. Don't know if I've explained it.
No, you've tied it in so well.
But it doesn't mean we're doing it well.
Okay.
It doesn't mean we're doing it well. We have the protection orders. We've done well to provide systems, etc. But it doesn't mean that we're giving them we are implementing or monitoring how well we're implementing in the right way.
Then I think definitely we can round off.
Yeah.
We're good to round off.
Yeah, definitely.
I was about to add another question and I saw given side eye. So I think we can round off. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes.
Thank you so much for walking us through this. I think this was a really insightful conversation and a balanced one, to see what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, as a country, and really just trying to tackle the issue from a numbers perspective. I like the numbers, what's actually happening in the country and what does it look like? And I think you've managed very well to do so. So thank you to you. Thank you to the institution you belong to, Medical Research Council. Thank you so much, Dr. Tama. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
That was today's episode of The Conversation Capital. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. For now, though, goodbye and God bless.